guy.
Hello, Scythe community. This is Ninju or Josh, and I'm doing the first podcast. It may be the only one on this topic. Uh, we're doing a parallel of Scythe and the different factions and their identities to World War. So we're doing it to European history and military strategy. And I've got with me a couple of co-podcasters. We have Bulldogcoma is his tag in this Scythe DE, and his name is Cole. And then we have our resident military history expert, Noah, who doesn't have a DE tag yet, but he's interested in Scythe. And that's going to be the lineup for today. I've been wanting to put out a Scythe podcast for a couple years now, and finally getting around to it and have the resources to do it. There's no Scythe podcast out there, even though there is a pretty involved hardcore community, and the actual sales of Scythe are in hundreds of thousands. So it's an extremely popular board game. Um,
Yeah, I was happy. This Cole Bulldogcoma. Don't look me up, okay? I'm not that good. Just let me get better first. But when you told me you wanted to do this, Josh, I thought it was a really good idea, and that there would be a receptive audience for it because Josh got me started on Scythe a month ago, maybe not even a month ago, and I've already sunk 120 hours in. So I mean, this game really gets you. And I think it definitely has a receptive community. So I hope you guys like this.
yeah, it's
I think
got so much depth with the simple rules. There's a lot of rules. They're simple, but the depth is almost like infinite in this game. Go ahead, Noah.
I was just gonna come in and say that you overhyped my expertise on history. More of a just passionate historian trying to learn stuff. So don't expect too much.
He's not a
Definitely not an
professional.
expert.
He's not a professional. Okay, that's fair enough, Noah. And this may just be a one-off. Do you want to talk a little bit about the premise? Either of you guys, maybe Cole, do you want to talk about the premise for today's? Because this was actually your idea for today's
Well, this was
episode.
my idea. This was my idea because I really like, first off, the art style and just the fact that the little details you notice in Scythe, like that. What got me started on thinking about this was I saw the encounter card with Saxony escorting their mech through the woods. And I thought to myself, man, that is totally what the Germans did to France, like in both world wars, right? Not to start them, but like that is like the main driver of where people were like, oh shit, we need to do something about these guys, is when they were taking their tanks and sailing them through the Ardennes forest. And there are so many little details like that in the game that I thought it might be cool to explore the parallels a little further.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's perfect. Yeah, so the format today is we're going to go through each faction, none of the secret ones in Rise of Fenris. And we're gonna go through each faction one by one. I'm gonna give since this is for hardcore fans, I'm gonna give a bit of a nuanced playstyle and identity for each faction. And then we're gonna talk about parallels between military tactics from the geographic region that corresponds to that faction's what it's based off of. So for Saxony, that would be Germany. For Nordic, that would be the Scandinavian countries. And then after that, we're gonna go through some historical pieces, a lot of military history, and then do some comparisons back and forth and parallels. And we're leaving out Albion because fuck Albion. That faction
Nobody likes Albion.
sucks. I don't know anything about that history. Noah does, but so don't sleep on it, but we aren't
Sleep
going to
on
address
it.
that today.
Not today. Maybe at some point. You gotta. I mean, I feel like you gotta give every faction at least a look, right?
We'll give it a fair
That's
shake. I did
true.
win one game with Albion once, so there's that. I guess I'm a bit of an expert.
Yeah,
Gotta
you are an
represent the
expert.
Highland boys.
Since I just play 1v1, you always leave IFA out of it, because it's completely unfair to do a normal faction versus IFA. So I like have played 0 games. So I would consider you an expert on Albion Cole at that point. um,
Thanks, man. But
oh, yeah.
yeah, should we? I think a good one to get started with, Josh. What do you think? Saxony or Rustviet? I think these are the big two obvious ones that like everybody is going to be able to make some connections with.
Definitely. Let's try Saxony.
Okay. All right. So what's the play style for Saxony, Josh?
Okay. Well, so Saxony's pretty unique, and I mean, if you've seen Fomoff and Joy Division's YouTube video where it does like a breakdown of the Saxony faction, you would know that they said that Saxony has the ability to replace an economy with their objectives and combats. So it's the only faction that can play without an economy, which makes it extremely flexible. And if you have an economy, then there's crazy optionality between your objectives, getting more than you can get as many combat stars as you want. And then you have a lot of surprise factors. So like you can go 4 stars in one turn, just out of nowhere. So people need to be extremely careful when they play against Saxony. They can't give up any easy fights. And then, yeah, so they need to stay super grouped. Let me see what else. So Saxony, you can do some things where, since they can only get two battle victories, you can just fight them and drain all their military resources as long as they're not able to end it, and then you can continuously benefit. So there's a lot of like feign attacks, type attacks you can do like that. Hit them on really high stakes territories where everything of theirs is grouped, and then they're forced to play a ton, so then you can pick up some easier combats. I mostly know Saxony from like a 1v1 perspective. Saxony also has some really unique movement patterns, and is insanely mobile, probably the most mobile in the game other than Rustviet, but Rustviet has more prereqs to be that mobile. So yeah, the standard opening you'd see in that video is going out with your underpass and speed mech, and then you move across to that village tunnel and then that metal next to it, and take your encounter, and then in 2 turns you can do the move to straight to the factory with your character. So you can get to the factory extremely quickly. Let me see, do you have any other touches on Saxony or Cole while I think of a couple more?
Yeah, I mean, just the ability to move, from tunnels to metal and metal to metal, and the fact that they start on oil and on metal, which kind of harkens back, getting into the history a little bit, that to German landmass and like their industrialization, like it's all set up in a way to kind of mirror the way the German war economy worked in both of the world wars. So. I don't know. I think that's a good segue into the history part, but
Yeah.
yeah, it's just their mobility definitely is huge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and they also basically what Joy Division talked about is that you should, when you're playing Saxony, especially 1v1, you should treat the tunnels like they are part of your base. If you drop workers on the tunnels, that'll force other people's movements to stop on the tunnel so you can attack them, and then they lose 2 power every time they get hit on the tunnel. You can do a feint attack, come right back, then they're down 4 power. So playing around the tunnels, which helps you control the entire map, is an advantage you really want to take. Like it's a key element you really want to take advantage of as Saxony. But yeah, so let's talk about some parallels. All right.
Yeah, so I think to start, just to go with I was going off, where they begin, like Germany was really it was inevitable that Germany was going to industrialize the way they were because of their resources, and they were able to exploit their forest and their mountain resources because of rivers connecting, parts of the geography, the rugged terrain to itself. So if you think about Germany, it's got a lot of forests, it's got a lot of mountains, it's got a lot of rivers, and their river walk is over to mountains and forest as well. So I think, just that very basic mech, right? You look at something like Riverwalk and you think, okay, that's kind of generic, whatever. Every faction has it. But I think with Saxony, it makes sense geographically, both in the game and in real life, which is one thing I came across recently checking this out.
Mm-hmm. And like one thing about Saxony is like it's about military dominance, and military is based on mechs. Riverwalk to metal would mean that for most bases except Rusviet, you can Riverwalk in and attack them on their like military factory in a way, their metal tile. So that way you can basically take over their military production if you're able to win those fights. So they're an extremely violent faction. And aggressive. You're
I wonder
somewhat
why.
rewarded for playing aggressively.
Yeah,
You wonder
yeah.
why?
I mean, obviously, it makes perfect sense. One thing I love, I want to bring up one of my favorite historical tidbits here is that, the mobility, the mountain to mountain thing, that Saxony can move places fast. The whole invasion of France in World War II, where they just steamrolled into Paris, was predicated upon methamphetamine. Pills called Pervitin that they gave out to the soldiers so they could stay up for 3 days and steamroll their way through the forest. I'm not kidding. This is
Absolutely.
100% historical fact. They all had like 10 methamphetamine pills, all the soldiers. So like the
They called it,
Blitzkrieg.
yeah, they called it Panzer chocolate, right?
Oh, okay. Wow. I had no idea. I mean, so like you're playing Scythe and then you ever like you're Polonia and then suddenly Saxony just like took all your resources from deep in your base. That's like the effect. They took like Saxony's using drugs to move extremely quickly and surprise you.
That's the thing. That's like where the mobility comes from. Is like meth invented the Blitzkrieg, man. Wow. If you didn't think it was bad enough.
Definitely fueled the Blitzkrieg. I think a lot of the push to Paris in World War II was also due to the fact of the failed push in World War One, where they got within 60 miles of Paris and then turned the other way. They turned, east to go wrap around. So during World War II, they knew that and they continued the push onto Paris to actually capture it, which they failed to do in World War One.
Yes, sir.
That's probably
Fleetwood plan.
Definitely,
They went
definitely a
around.
drive. Yeah, if you look at a lot of German generals during World War II, they have a lot of previous knowledge of World War One. They look at it quite a bit, and surprisingly enough, a lot of them had a lot of historic knowledge about like Napoleon. Like when a lot of these guys are like getting ready to invade Russia, like they know exactly what happened to Napoleon, and that's what a lot of people like kind of make fun of Germany for like invading Russia during the winter or whatever. But that's exactly what they knew they were going to do, and they knew what would happen if they were caught up in the winter. So
Yeah.
they knew what they
Well,
were doing,
they
but
did. Yeah, they didn't even invade during winter. They
yeah, they
invaded
just were
during
stuck
like
there.
yeah,
the middle of
exactly.
summer. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
And as
perfect
far as
timing.
the mobility of Saxony, it's both during both world wars. I would argue that Germany is like definitely one of the most mobile armies in both of these
Mhm.
wars. Whether it be their tanks, their railroads. They also had just a massive amount of horses. That most of these armies during World War One. I mean, primarily World War One, they're gonna have 1 million horses, but even World War Two, the German army has so many horses and carriages and just supply lines. Like they didn't rely just on these tanks and vehicles and railroads. They had so many horses and they had railroads going everywhere. In World War One, they built a railroad all the way down to the Ottoman Empire to like fuel, um, just to get oil to like fuel their war machine too, which is pretty interesting.
Yeah.
Wow. Yep. Yep.
Uh,
And
yeah.
go ahead, Josh.
Oh, I was gonna say, Cole, you were talking about how you play as Saxony and what happens in the Scythe game and how that's a parallel to like high level World War II. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Well, I think the funny thing about it is like you can go. This is what I see with low level Saxony, right? Like you go in hard, and if you don't know exactly what you're doing, you're fighting, you're scrapping, you're taking stuff over. You feel like a big dog, and then all of a sudden, you're spread pretty thin, and you have like zero power and no combat cards. Like your meth has run out, man. Your baggy's empty, and your dealer's not in town, right? Like you didn't upgrade your bolster power, man. You didn't have time for that nonsense. So
Yeah. So, as in World War II, they went out, they basically like pissed everyone off, took on like fights, battles on all fronts, including trying to trying to conquer Russia. And then literally everyone, well, I guess they had allies, but a lot of the world and really powerful countries just turned on them. So, that's a super obvious high level one that actually I missed that when I was looking at this originally. So, yeah, that's a good one. Okay.
happened too many times in the game
It's
because I
happened too
still
many
kind of
times
suck.
for you.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, it encourages the aggression. So, like, you can really get sucked into that, but it is a short sighted. And you're just like, a lot of times you can have a lot of agency much quicker than other factions. So, you do feel like that could be the advantageous play, but it's really hard to pull off correctly. What else do we have for Saxony? Let me see here. So, I mean, let's talk about uh, Germany in World War II trying to take over Russia and invading Russia. So, one thing that was a major oversight was the Germans. Like, there's you need with any military you need supply lines, you need ways to get food, supply your army, and you need like a supply line to reinforcements. So they had a major oversight in their railroads. So they invaded Russia, but they didn't realize that their rail lines were not compatible with the Russian rail lines. So that like the vast transportation network, like they were severed from theirs. And that was a huge issue that is pretty crazy that it was overlooked in the like strategizing and preparation to invade. So the parallel I'm seeing with the rail lines would be so the transportation network of Saxony is the metal and tunnels. They can jump between metal they control and tunnels, and metal they control and metal, vice versa, swapped around. So that's like they can go all over the map. With Rusviet, they can jump between villages they control, and they can also jump between any village and the factory to villages they control. So they have incompatible transportation networks, which would be the same as the rail lines. And the other piece is that, Russia is like this vast territory and extremely difficult to conquer. There's so much space for them to just keep retreating. When Saxony goes up into Russia's territory on the Scythe board, there's no mountains up there in that top right corner. So they basically get cut off. They're lost deep in Russian territory with no supplies. They can't get reinforcements. If they want to bring their mech back for counterattacks, subsequent attacks, it's multiple moves to get back up there, and they're basically just trapped in a vast territory. So I think that's one of the really cool connections. You guys have thoughts on this one at all?
No, I totally agree with that. Yeah, I mean, yeah, Russia's just a vast, vast plains most of the time. They have different areas, but yeah, I mean, it takes a long time to get somewhere, and once you've pushed in, there's not easy, just retreating back out.
Yeah, and they use that territory strategically in the different military history where they'll like basically drain the invading military of their resources, and they're just like they're just trying to seek a battle, even like just with Napoleon invading Russia versus the Tsar, I guess. They were just like chasing elusive enemies that they were better than, but they can never catch them, and they just got more and more drained. Just
Yeah.
walking further into Russia. The other thing I wanted to talk about with the rail lines really quick is just a nuance to that, which is so Germany invaded Russia. They didn't realize the rail lines were incompatible, but eventually they adapted. They adapted the German rail lines to like be compatible with, sorry, the Russian rail lines to be compatible with the German rail lines. So like there's like one point on the Scythe map actually that's like a universal adapter for their for both transportation networks, which is that village tunnel in the middle of the Scythe board, so outside of Rustviet's base. That's it's like it's keyed into both, since it's a village, but then it ties Rustviet into the whole tunnel network, and then the basically for Saxony, if they control that, then they're like on a village, but they're also tied into their entire tunnel network and denying Rustviet. So that's one example of like adapting it, or just a universal adapter. And then the other one, which is the factory, which is part of Rustviet's transportation network, building a mine on there would be like Germany adapting the Russian rail lines to suit their transportation network. So yeah.
Yeah, very nice. Yeah, makes perfect sense.
Okay.
It's a good segue into Rustviet.
Okay, let's talk. All right, we'll talk Rustviet. Okay, so
Everybody's favorite.
yeah. Do you want to talk about that identity with some nuances, Cole, or should I?
You go ahead. I play him differently every time, even though I probably shouldn't.
Okay. So Rustviet, the way they like their identity and playstyle on the Scythe board, I would say is because they have Relentless, they can just produce like the thing you want early just for openings is you want metal and workers very quickly. So they're set up to basically produce a bunch of times in a row, get mechs out and get workers out, and then they're like actually they have a huge amount of manpower, and then they can get so many resources and be so developed by like turn 6 or 7, whereas no other faction is gonna be developing that quickly, anywhere near that quickly. They maybe like 1/4 as quickly. So huge amount of manpower, huge amount of resources, which would be a parallel to Russia during World War II. Let me see what else. So, I mean, they have military advantages. Since they have Relentless, they can move. If they have the move upgraded, they can triple move every turn, which strategically, when you're playing around like factory movements and normal movements in a 1v1, is an insane advantage. I think when it's utilized, it can be utilized by mediocre players and to advantage, but it's even better with like the grandmaster players. And then within that, I mean, so you can attack, like you can have a relentless military that's like completely a war of attrition. You can attack with 3, like lose all those battles, probably get back onto the map and hit with a couple more and like, so that's 3 attacks per turn that you can win if you want to surprise them, or you can just lose, make them drain resources. And then let me see. Oh yeah, so since they have People's Army, which is like a nod to their manpower advantage militarily, I guess, they can attack with 3 groups of 2 to different territories, which any other faction, the max they can attack with in 1 turn is 3 mechs. So that's 6 mechs, but you have to divide it between 3 territories. Or alternately, you can attack with 4 mechs to 1 territory, which you can only attack with 3. Attacking, you win ties. So they have huge military advantages late game. They're extremely flexible. Like their transportation is only matched by Saxony. Let's see what else. I would say, yeah, People's Army is their main distinguisher, and they can also jump to the factory. They basically have all the resources they can want as long as they're not inhibited in their play by other factions, and they can jump to the factory, which is worth so many points at any time because of their factory card mech. So I would say that's an overview on the faction and its strengths.
Nice. Yeah, that sounds about right. and I do think this one hits hard with the historical parallels as well along with Saxony, because even just the starting position in the standard opening is like, you're gonna make some metal and you're gonna make some freaking workers. That's what you're gonna do, right? Like, you're probably gonna produce twice. I don't really care which board you're playing. Most people are gonna produce twice, right?
Mm-hmm.
So just to begin, you're alone. You're far away in your base. Nobody wants to mess with you, and you're just making all these guys, man. And these guys are making all these resources. Like, that's Russia to a T. Um, and
Yep.
and kind of the autarky of them, the fact that they don't have to rely on anybody else's stuff for the most part. Like, you see the Russians just up there in the frozen north of their tundra farm, growing food and feeding peasants, and like, you're kind of like, oh, it's fine. Like, he's just up there in that corner with 8 workers doing his thing. Like, he's not a threat. But the moment you piss him off and they like descend, here comes the Soviet Union to occupy half your continent for 50 years.
Yeah. Yeah, they're grouped up with a million things, and then it just turns into a huge control of the board suddenly with that triple move or 2 triple moves in a row. They control the entire board. I think one parallel we were talking about before with Russia is that even like with the current war with Ukraine, Russia is so like resource rich that like these sanctions, the economic sanctions we're putting on Russia are like not having as strong as an impact as they should. Like, it doesn't matter that much to Russia because they just have so many resources.
Yeah, it's how they've always developed historically, is like being cut off from mainland Europe. They've never been a true European power in the sense that people think of European powers. And that's that happened way back when the Mongols sort of divided Russia up into the Khanate. So it definitely makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
No, what
and
do you
if you
think?
even look at the start of the invasion of Russia into Germany, they were allies, before this point, and Germany amassed on the border, and they told Stalin like, hey, they're going to attack us, and then they eventually did. But one thing is that Russia was literally fueling the invasion that was to come. Like, they were actively transporting food, resources into Germany to fuel Germany as well. And then they get attacked by those exact resources that they were just fueling in, and then in turn have to fall back, get their shit together, move their factories back. We talked about that, where they moved all their factories back away from the fronts early on, and then they had to reamass all these resources, and then they came back swinging hard. So it's definitely very impressive. They do have just these massive resources, and they were just able to do this, and then they just have manpower and just the pure drive to hit back.
Yeah. So I was
And
laughing, but
that's just like the factory. Sorry, go ahead.
oh, I was saying I was laughing, Noah, but yeah, no, hold that point, Cole. I was laughing, Noah, but did you just say that they Russia and Germany were allied in World War II, and then Russia was fueling, like they literally fueled the resources for Germany to invade them?
So yeah, before months prior to the Operation Barbarossa, the Russians were sending Germany resources, like they were allies.
Mm-hmm.
And then they started amassing the troops, and people were like, "Hey, Stalin, like, Hitler's going to attack you." And to this day, no one knows why Stalin had any trust in Hitler, because he was a very suspicious guy. Just prior to this, before the start of World War II, going into World War II, like Stalin, like threw so many of his generals in jail or killed these guys, like tortured them, like, because he was so suspicious. And so it's still looked at today as like, why did he ever trust Hitler? Like, why was he
Oh,
not suspicious up
yeah,
until the point where the Germans crossed his border and declared war?
that is a really good question.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think he could even imagine, like, the possibility that could actually happen may have been like too big for him. I feel like it was like
Yeah,
Neville Chamberlain or I don't know if Hitler actually had this personality that kind of lulled people in, because Chamberlain, the British Prime Minister, was also like, oh yeah, he's a fine fella. Uh,
Yeah.
I don't think he's gonna do anything like that.
Yeah, he denied
Hitler,
it to the British people again and again. He said, "No, it's fine. He's gonna take a little bit of Belgium. He's gonna be okay. He's gonna take Poland. He's gonna be okay."
Yeah, I mean,
yes, but let him.
it's
And
possible
I think
that
a lot of that is probably a lot of these people did see the Great War, so a lot of these people are just ignoring a lot of things because they truly do not want another war. They just got done with World War One, and it was just absolutely detrimental to so many countries. Like, so many people died that they were just like, we gotta avoid it, even if it means turning a blind eye to some atrocities that are happening.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same thing today, like with appeasement. You have to appease a nuclear power because you can't imagine that they would have the stones to attack another nuclear power. I feel like Stalin kind of felt the same way in World War II.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a fair point. He's already fighting a massive front against the British and the French, and it would make no sense for him to attack Russia,
Yeah.
but he did.
Man, to loop back to the point I think I was going with earlier,
Oh yeah.
saying that they can kind of pull back in a mass strength once again. The combination of People's Army and the one where you move straight to the factory. I forget the name of the mech, but
Me too.
I
Yeah.
mean, you can do whatever you want with Rustby. You can get kicked off the factory or any place on the board, and then just with your regular move, you're back on the factory with a mech, a worker, and your character playing 4 combat cards. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, you can get kicked right off the board, and then
Mm.
immediately you're right back to the strongest position with all these combat resources that you've amassed.
Yeah. So they like bounce
And
back insanely hard, like Russia did when they had to move all their factories.
yeah, and I mean, just the counteroffensives that Russia pulled off. I forget the name of the battle, but after the siege of Stalingrad was finally lifted and Russia started to push back, they put up the largest counteroffensive still today in military history that have ever happened against the Germans. And this is after losing a million or so guys, or more.
Yeah, and that you can go right back to not being able to retreat over Russia. Like, the Germans couldn't get back quick enough. There's a historic battle. One of the only times that cavalry is going to be used in World War II. The Russians launched a counteroffensive against these Germans who are just over it. They just want to go home, so they just retreat, and the Russians run them down with their horse cavalry and their tanks, just absolutely slaughtering guys as they try to run away.
It's awesome, man. They had it coming. Sorry, Germany. And Hitler wouldn't even let him. Hitler wouldn't let them retreat. They were like, "Dude,
Yeah.
we could strategically pull back and regroup." And Hitler was like, "Nah, nah, we're not having any of that. You stay there and you die."
Yep, exactly. In the Stalingrad pocket of the German army, he actually promoted the general to be a major because no major had ever surrendered before in the German army.
Yes.
And Hitler fully expected this German officer to commit suicide because that was the way they did things. And he ended up just surrendering because he said, "Nah, I'm good."
Can you explain like the
What a guy.
Stalingrad situation? Just like in general terms, like
In
why
general terms,
this guy was promoted because he just didn't like Hitler just didn't want him to retreat basically.
well, why he got promoted was because the Stalingrad fight had been going on for a very long time, and they eventually got surrounded by the Russians, and the Sixth Army got surrounded by the Russians. A bunch of different German armies tried to break through and rescue them, but there was no rescuing them. So then
Hmm.
these guys just got completely surrounded, and the Russians were like, you can surrender if you want, and he did, even though Hitler told him not to. So
Just a
and
hopeless
Yeah,
military
and
situation. Yeah.
saved some of his men. Most of them, got carted off to Siberia and the gulags and whatnot, and a lot of it didn't survive. But it was better than getting, I guess, mass slaughtered. So.
was it
And
though?
these guys, yeah, maybe not. I don't know.
Maybe
And these
not.
guys had been here for a while. These guys had survived the winter in Stalingrad. This is another point. These guys brought, I don't know the exact number of horses they brought to like run supplies and whatnot, but they ended up with no horses by the end because they ate every single one of their horses.
Yep.
So that gives you a
Yeah, and
sense
they
of
besieged.
the situation they were in, probably being super
Yeah.
surrounded. Yeah.
Yeah, that was a desperate pitch battle, and this was after the Russians had already been besieged and starved out for months. And it wasn't even a strategically important city. It was just named Stalingrad. It was literally a prestige thing that Hitler was like, "We got to take the city with his name."
Yeah.
I had no idea about that. That's really interesting. Okay. Yeah. You guys have other Germany points? Should we move on to Tagawa?
Tagawa, let's do it. The
Okay.
Japs, the Japanese.
Okay, so let me pull this up here. Hold on one second. All right, so let me talk a little bit about Tagawa. Oh, here we go. Okay. So Tagawa as a faction, it actually has, other than Saxony, I would say it has the most unique play style in Scythe. And you have to play it completely differently because of its traps and its lack of a speed mech. It has no agency because it can only move 1 step per turn, and every other faction has 2 steps per turn. So you can't really ever take battles on your terms. You're basically just being attacked by other factions. They use the element of surprise and chance by placing their traps as they move across the map to protect them. Usually with Tagawa, what you want to do is have a big spread. So like normally this is like Scythe is a race to finish your stars in a way, other than like you need to push other people down if they're going to beat you to it, and then you finish yours and end on your terms. But Tagawa plays completely differently, where you have to add in extra turns where you're just spreading out, which you would never do with any other faction. So you want to have a big spread, and usually you want to have like an outer layer on your spread should be single mechs. So mechs, like Tagawa's mech abilities are all set up so that way they do really well when the mech is alone on the edges of its territory as like a sentry kind of, but that can fight pretty well. So you actually want to set up a weird formation around the map, and then you're kind of leading your exploration with your character, and you lay traps as you go. And the way you play Tagawa is you have to be thinking multiple steps ahead because you have no agency to move and jump on other factions. So you're gonna you could walk 5 steps with your character to the factory, and then they jump on you, and your trap doesn't stop them, your combat cards don't stop them, and they kick you 1 step from the factory, and you basically lost the game. So you need to be prepared, and it's basically like Tagawa mentality when you play it is like you're like the early bird mentality. Is like you have to get to every territory first, and then you fortify it. So like once you get to the territory, it's really not worth their time or really hard to get them off of it. So you're creeping across the map, fortifying as you go. Yeah, so I think it's thinking super far ahead and realizing that like you need to have spread to stall the game at all times, and you can't you're never getting 6 stars in a multiplayer game unless you have like industrial, but most times you're not getting 6 stars. So you have to play around that, thinking like, all right, I'm never ending on my terms. I want to have good spread. I may not even finish like my worker star, because when I go back to group up, someone will end the game and I'll have a lower point score, and like there's no hope for me to finish that. So the other thing is with Ronin, like I said, having the single lone mechs on the perimeter of your territory, then you get the +2 every time you fight. But if you have one worker with that mech, you don't get it. So it needs to be completely alone. And you can do some special stuff when you're at 10 power where you attack with 3 different units from like a tunnel and hit in 3 places, and you just like forfeit all those fights and get 2 power off each and get the power star. So that's like one little fancy thing you can do, but like actually getting to 10 power and set up like that doesn't happen that often. So Tagawa is like a responder and a setter up. Like you set up traps, you set false expectations, and you think really far ahead. That's the overview. Yeah, of the style, the identity of the faction.
Nice.
Interesting.
I didn't realize that they got a bonus for being like a lone mech. That's really interesting. I could already see a lot of parallels
Yeah. So, and the other
for
thing,
that.
yeah, and it's not just that mech, but if they have, so if you put a mech, so like you have a lone mech, there's Ronin, it's 2 power if it gets attacked. You put a lone mech in the lake, it gets to play 2 combat cards. Usually one mechs only get to play 1 combat card per mech you have. So it's like its own like single man army if you've got Ronin and the other lake mech and you're sitting in a lake and you get attacked by a lake faction. You're
Yeah, the Suton mech.
Yeah, Suton, like 1 man army, super strong, which is completely different. So yeah, it's all about keeping your mechs like singular in strategic positions. Like you can use a mech like that I'm talking about, where it's two cards to like block Polonia once they've taken an encounter, or once they've taken an encounter and they need to get back in the water to get to any other ones. You take that water area right next to them, so they can't do any more encounter chains because you're just way too strong. So there are like some really cool tactical uses of that ability. Yeah, so what type of parallels are you seeing for like the single man army stuff, Noah?
The parallels I thought about right away was basically during World War II, the Japanese strategy for the Pacific was to capture a bunch of these islands and then chain up a defense where you have troops on your islands and then you have ships in between and then you have aircraft flying, wherever else. Just a solid line of defense of these islands. That was their grand plan. As the war went on, it didn't happen the way they wanted it to, so a lot of these islands get cut off, but they still have a lot of men on these islands. Rather than surrendering, these men would go on to fight, months longer, even though they had no support from the main army. They dug into
Yeah.
these islands. You can look at Iwo Jima, you can look at Okinawa. These guys dug in and they were ready to fight to the end. So like they didn't need any help. They just were gonna be their own guys, and they're gonna fight to the bitter end. Fight with just so much fury. So that's definitely just a
They were
parallel I think
they were
about.
ruthless. Yeah. Oh, that's a great
Yeah, I
one.
mean
Oh,
one great word is fanatical.
that reminds me of, there were a few Japanese soldiers, but the most notable guy was in the Philippines, who he was fighting a lone war until like the 90s. Like this dude was literally just killing farmers in the Philippines as a soldier in the Imperial Army, and it took the Japanese mobilizing his old commander during the war and telling him to step down and that the war is over for him to stop. And like he moved to Brazil and had like 9 kids afterwards.
I
So
didn't know that part of it, but yeah, absolutely. I mean, these guys they were committed. They were fanatical.
I mean, yeah, the fanatical is the right word. I mean, they're also kamikaze pilots, right? So it's like a 1 man army
yeah,
by itself, and they're zealous. They're willing to sacrifice their life for the country. So,
I think there's also a large misconception with kamikaze pilots, which I didn't even know until about maybe a year ago. Whereas a lot of kamikaze pilots were actually not willing. These are not guys who said, "Hell yeah, I'm gonna jump in this plane and drive it straight into an aircraft or carrier." These are not guys who are like so down with the cause because they didn't start using kamikaze pilots till the late war. And a lot of these pilots who the Japanese army had like, these are good pilots for the most part, and when they started being told to fly their planes into the sides of ships and just die, they just totally weren't down for it. So a lot of these guys are like volunteer pilots that they just got super drunk the night before and be like, hey, this is your last night on Earth, like, what do you want to do? And they just got drunk and had a good time, and then they flew these planes into these boats. So it's definitely a little bit of a misconception. They're still fanatical because they still agreed to do it for the the glory of the emperor or whatever. But it's kind of a misconception when it comes to kamikaze pilots.
Okay, no, that's good to know.
That being said, I'm sure there were more than a couple guys who were just straight fanatical and was like, hey, yeah, I'm gonna do this.
Yeah. Let's see. Do we have?
Throwback.
Let's do one concluding point on Tagawa. I think I may have one, or if any of you guys have one in mind, and then we'll wrap this first episode up. But I think I see a second episode where we get into Nord. I think we've got some more stuff on Tagawa, maybe a little bit of Crimea, and yeah, I see a continuation for episode 2.
For sure. Hit us
Sounds
with that
good. Yeah,
last one, Josh.
yeah. What is it?
Okay. I'm trying to find it. Hold on a second.
Oh, still trying to
I'm
find
checking
it.
my notes. All right, so it was about the aircraft carriers. It was a parallel between the aircraft carriers, Pearl Harbor. So basically, it's coming back sort of. So Pearl Harbor was a preemptive attack, and what they were trying to do against the U.S. was attack aircraft carriers because they knew from previous like military engagements that aircraft carriers were actually like one of the strategic keys to winning World War II. So the U.S. I think was all about like, all right, battleships are going to be great versus Japan, and so the Japanese were multiple steps ahead and preemptively hit us at Pearl Harbor. Their actual targets were aircraft carriers, but for some reason, there's like some story about it. Our aircraft carriers were all missing, the US's aircraft carriers, so they just hit like 6 battleships, which was not their target at all. And it turns out that battleships didn't matter that much for World War II, but they were correct. It was all about aircraft carriers because like the distance between the U.S. and Japan. So this is like the concept of spacing in Scythe, but the distance was like for bombers to travel. It was too far without refueling for us to go from one like to attack each other. So the aircraft carrier basically, what does that do? It lets you drive your boat a lot closer and then launch bombers from much closer from the ocean and go bomb Japan or bomb the U.S. So that was actually the key. So again, Japan is clever, deceptive, preemptive strike, thinking many turns ahead of the U.S. and also more advanced on the actual tactics that matter. So, I mean, I think that's a great example of how you should play Tagawa is many moves ahead. You're thinking many moves ahead of how you might get a battle because you're not going to have the agency to take it as you wish. And I think like there was potentially some sort of innovation on the actual ability for those bombers. Maybe it's just because it was Pearl Harbor, so it was much more geographically closer. So it was within range, so maybe U.S. like spacing error. Or there was some innovation of how they were able to get the bombers that far to bomb the battleship. So I don't know, Noah, do you have any info on that?
It primarily is just going to be like the location of Pearl Harbor because the
That was the
Japanese didn't
key.
actually use bombers to attack. I'm not sure how much they even used in the sense bombers. They used torpedoes, dive bombers, and such. So it's more of like fighter craft that they armed
Okay.
with these explosives more than anything else. And also, apparently, we've kind of tossed around like, oh, where were the aircraft carriers? They were trying to go for them, but apparently that's not actually completely true. They were just going to hit Pearl Harbor because it was where the American fleet was. If they could hit aircraft carriers, they definitely would have.
That would have been the
But they
priority.
weren't their main focus. It was just to hit their fleet early, hit the American fleet early on, and just do as much damage to knock America out of the war for the Japanese. You know what I mean? Like the only way that the Japanese and America are going to fight is naval battles, and then naval landings and whatnot. So like if you knock out your opponent's only way to attack you, then that's it. It's over. You know what I mean? So and a lot of them thought they had done it when they sunk as many ships as they did, but they didn't.
Yeah, so it was basically trying to win the war against the U.S. in one decisive blow, pretty much. That was the
Yeah,
idea.
very preemptive strike. And there's a lot of speculation of there's a lot of guys early on that said, "Hey, Japan's gonna attack Pearl Harbor. It's gonna happen. Like we know it's gonna happen." And I'm sure there's some conspiracy theories about whether or not FDR let it happen so that they would just go to war.
Have
You know what I mean?
motivation to join the fight
Yeah,
and, yeah,
exactly.
fight
Just
against
get the
that
American people.
axis. Yeah.
Um,
Okay.
I don't know how true any of that really is. It's always been kind of an interesting thought, though. But yeah, I mean, they knew it was going to happen. They didn't know when. Japan had been poking at America for a while. There's a lot of unknown attempts to bomb America using different uh, methods, and there's actually one case of someone dying to like on mainland America dying to a Japanese made bomb because they had these like rice paper balloons that they floated all the way across the ocean all the way onto the west coast of America, and then once they got far enough they'd blow, they'd pop, and then they'd fall down and there would be an explosive. And
Wow.
there was a case where these school kids found it and it ended up blowing up, and a couple of these kids died, but no one knew about that because America wanted to keep it so like hush hush that the Japanese could touch America, right? Because it's so far
Yeah.
away.
That were touchable. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, and then as far as like innovations, like even the Doolittle raid followed Pearl Harbor. There wasn't really much innovation there. Like they literally stripped these bombers just to make it to Japan. Like there was no, oh, we have good bombers that will reach Japan. Like they stripped these bombers of everything, launched them off aircraft carriers, which was totally never done before, which is I guess is kind of an innovation,
Yeah.
but they're not designed for it. And then they fully planned to ditch the planes. Like planes weren't going to land; they were going to ditch these planes. So, not really a whole lot of innovation, but just people kind of pushing things to their boundaries and doing things. So,
Yeah. So that you're talking about the U.S. counterattack
yeah, the Doolittle
after
raid.
after Pearl Harbor. Okay. Yeah. So I mean, I think what's happening is like maybe the concept at play here is that people are working around a limitation of spacing and like fuel for planes and the distance between the two.
And that absolutely definitely that was part of it for sure. The Japanese loss at Midway can definitely be argued that it was timing of different planes and armaments and refueling and all that is what lost
Like
the
logistical
Japanese
spacing issues. Yeah, and yeah,
yeah.
yeah. And I would say that that's like a major concept for your deficit when you're playing Tagawa is spacing. Like you don't control the spacing, you need to be hyper aware, you need to plan super far ahead. And I would say that yeah, that is a parallel is like how we engaged in World War II with Japan was like all around spacing, and that's like what you need to be thinking about with Tagawa.
Yeah, and it's definitely as far as spacing goes, like when you have an entire ocean and you have there's no way to like get a line of defense really. I mean, you can line ships up, but like
Yeah.
getting control of islands and then controlling those areas and then just island hopping to just slowly gain control that's how you keep a line of defense. So yeah, it's definitely a lot of like trying to take control of different things so then you can hold it and then yeah.
Yeah, it's like defense by expansion. I mean, yeah, like what you're saying is that like a shoreline of an ocean for a country is not defensible. Like it's just logistically impossible
And
almost. And like that's something On the next episode, when we talk about Nord, we're actually going to talk about that too. So I think it's a good point to wrap it up. Thank you guys. Thank you, Noah. Thank you, Cole, for being on here today. And good talk, guys.
Mm-hmm. Yep, let's do it again next time and finish it up. And I hope that people appreciate this and we can do it again.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's extremely late in China where Cole is. So thanks for bearing with us there, Cole. And I'll see you guys on the next one.
All right. See you guys.